Culture is what people whisper in the lobby, not what the leaders write on the website.
Hey, welcome back to the Church Staff Book Club. I'm Jonathan Malm.
Jason Young.
We're talking about The Comeback Effect. It's, yes, a book about hospitality, about creating a welcoming environment for your church, but there's stuff to be said for every part of your ministry, every part of your church. But specifically, we're talking about welcoming. And today we're going to be talking about chapter 2. So whether you've read the book, whether you've not read the book, whether you have it, whether you want to follow along, we want the Church Staff Book Club to just be a resource to help you not have to learn this leadership thing all on your own. So that's what we're doing with this. So follow along, leave comments if you're watching us on YouTube, leave comments, find us on Instagram, on Facebook, ask us questions. We're happy to make this as useful a resource to you as possible. So create a culture, not a job title. That's chapter 2. That's what we're talking about today. So what is that about?
You know what? Can you, I think your story about Guatemala is great. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So whenever I was age 6 to 12, my parents, we were missionaries in Guatemala, and we would do ministry out and about different villages, all around the area. And one thing that I always found interesting is we would go visit someone in their house, and it was, a dirt floor, maybe one room, not electricity. We would go into the house, we would sit down, and the family would send their youngest kid running away. I didn't know what that was all about. I later found out what it was about, but the kid would run away, run down to the local tienda, like the little store that they had, and they would get a Coke and they would bring it back to our family. And that was just, every house that we visited, they would bring us a nice, fresh, cold Coke. And that was just something cultural in Guatemala whenever we were there. It was interesting. I didn't realize, but it was something that like every house, it was kind of like a non-negotiable. They were poor. Coca-Cola was pretty expensive for them, but that was a way that they could honor us as guests. And that's kind of what we're talking about in this chapter. The idea of, is welcoming, is hospitality, is it part of a culture? Is it something that just like, there's no question about it. Like, we are going to be a welcoming place. Or is it something that you have to create a ministry for? Not saying we shouldn't create a ministry for this, but is it something that like, oh, that's the welcome team's job. That's the greeter's job. That's the parking lot, the ushers. They welcome people. We do our thing. That's really what this chapter is all about.
The reason I think that's such a great story, it's simple, but I think it illustrates this opening idea that just like every home you went in had a culture, every church has a culture. So we're not here talking about if the church has a culture. We're here talking about what kind of culture. And what's cool is it's either created on accident or on purpose. And the beautiful thing is you have direct control, if you will. I don't know if that's the best word, but direct control over what kind of culture do we want here? I think about it like this. Culture is what people whisper in the lobby, not what the leaders write on the website.
Yeah, that's really good.
And so it's like, well, what are people saying? And so it may be worth just kind of unpacking a little bit. It's like we know what culture is because we pay attention to like fashion culture or, in politics, there's a cultural aspect. In church world, so there's culture, and it's like, what is it? You know, you gave an illustration there in Guatemala. Cool. We agree, like, okay, church has a culture, but like, what is it? And really, I think about it, we could do a formal definition, but in reality, it's how we really do things here.
Yeah, I think
who we really are here.
You made such a good point, though, that it's not what someone says. I think about that with parenting all the time. Yeah. I think about, I think about that. I like have this issue where I get angry at my son, right? And like afterwards, I'm like, I love you, son. I love you so much. I'm sorry. I wasn't really angry. I can say that all I want, but whenever I get frustrated or whenever I the tone of my voice shifts because he did something that I'm unhappy about, I'm really working on this, but that is who I am. That is my, if you will, my culture, my unified culture. I can say all I want. I can say, oh, I would never get mad at you for that. And then I get mad at him. He reads what my actions say, not what my words say. So the same thing, pastor could say, hey, we are a welcoming church. We just love people. But then so often in churches, there's this breakdown between what is said from the pulpit and what happens in the seats, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the pulpit is fine. The problem is there's so much that happens before the person ever hears the pastor or whoever is communicating. And then there's so much that happens after it that the pastoral preaching platform, pulpit, whatever is such a micro part of this macro experience. And so I think what we're really communicating is all of it matters. I mean, it's kind of like, you just talked about the house. I mean, when we think about going in people's homes or how we were raised, I bet if you're watching or listening today, if we were to unpack what it was like in your home growing up, what's interesting is there are maybe like very clear rules. We take our shoes off at the front door. We don't walk through the house, with shoes, or, this person in our house gets to hold the remote. But what's interesting about culture is sometimes you don't know it until you bump up against it.
Yeah.
And so it's like unspoken rules. This is a silly illustration, but some of you will get this. It's like, not to touch the thermostat in your house because it's gonna create this, this war, a dramatic word, but it's gonna create this thing. But sometimes you don't know until you actually do it. And I think of in the church world, when you think about a guest coming in, and in our first episode, we really talked about what's best for the guest, right? So when you think about culture, sometimes the guest doesn't know until they bump up against and they quickly realize, oh, they don't do that here, or, so maybe the best way to sum it up would be culture is what people feel long before the sermon is ever preached.
Yeah.
And so we're obviously saying it's really important. And since that is true, maybe we unpack it just for a little bit, why is culture such a big deal?
Yeah.
And then maybe we figure out okay, well, what are some things that people can do to hone in? Because you're not going to change your culture overnight, right? And I guarantee there's somebody watching, listening right now. You know exactly what we're talking about. There's things in your church culture that you're like, oh man, if I could change that. But maybe it's your senior pastor, executive pastor. If you're in a smaller church, maybe you're in a single staff church, and it's maybe a personnel committee or elders or deacons, but there's somebody that's influencing some things that you have a problem with.
Yeah.
And in those moments, what do you do? So these are, I think practically tactical things that, maybe we can unpack a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the culture that we're trying to create in my house. I think I wouldn't be as aware of it if we hadn't, my wife, her family is Argentine. My family is American white, right? We grew up in Guatemala, so there's a little bit of a bridge of gap, right? But the culture of Argentina, we go there for a month every year, versus the culture of the United States is so different. And I really see the difference in culture whenever I, like you said, bump up against a different culture. Your guests, if your church perfectly reflects their identity as a person, they're not even going to notice the culture. But it's in the differences. When you get married and you start creating your own family and then you visit your parents again, you're like, whoa, our cultures have changed, right? So, I mean, it is, you notice it whenever you bump up against it, and you see it in one thing we're really trying to do with my 4-year-old is I'm trying to teach him, to hug everyone when we say bye. That's an Argentine thing. I really love that cultural element, right? We don't just slip out. We don't just do a broad wave to everyone. We say bye to every single person. We say hello to every single person. When someone walks in, we say hello to them. We give hugs. That's something that I love about the Argentine culture. But then I bump up against a friend who has a teenager, and the teenager does not acknowledge that I exist in the room. Yeah. And I'm whoa, I'm so glad that I'm focusing on this culture for my son, because that's what I want our family to be like. And man, you see that. Again, if you were raised in, my dad, he comes from Illinois, really lower class So like when you walk in, no one acknowledges you, even like adults. Like you just kind of like, if something good happened to you, you're like, quiet down. Like they don't want you to like celebrate things, right? Like that can create a toxic environment, in my opinion, because that's not what I'm used to. That's not what I feel is loving, right? If you grew up in that environment, you're like, that's actually loving. That's great, right? So culture really matters to the guest, because they either feel at home or they feel repelled.
Yeah. You talked about, some of the cultural differences. It reminds me, like, I see this in some churches. Again, these might be silly, lighthearted, but again, they're still revelatory. I remember going to a church one time, and I can't remember if I was there, like, they hired me to, like, assess their services, or like if we were just attending. I don't recall, but I remember that when the church was over, I mean, like, here we are, guests, first time. I think my wife and I, it was just the two of us. I don't think our kids were there with us. And man, people bolted as if they were Olympic sprinters trying to get to the finish line. And it was just an interesting observation that nobody stayed and chit-chatted. It wasn't like this communal aspect. And so for us, again, it was one moment, right? So it's not a judgmental thing. It was just a takeaway for us that it was an opportunity that we could have connected with some people, but that opportunity was gone because of the cultural aspect. And we did ask somebody later, they're like, oh yeah, as soon as the service is over, people jet, right? Yeah. So it's just
so stop there. What would we do to fix that? I mean, like, let's say that's our church. Obviously, there's a certain amount of, if you have 2 or 3 services, there's kind of a, like, we need them to get out of here, right? Like there's a reality to that, especially if you have a small building, small parking lot. But let's say it's the 3rd service, the last of the service, and you're like, what can we do to change this? Like, what are some practical ways we might be able to change that culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's asking. You're right. So if there are multiple services, I know there's a turnaround time, but conversations don't have to happen just in the auditorium or the sanctuary or whatever your church calls it. I mean, there's a lobby aspect. Maybe, I know out west they don't have much of an interior lobby, but there's opportunity to hang outside, like on patios and that kind of thing. I think it's
Texas, not so much. Outdoors ain't gonna happen.
No, because you will, like, baked to death. Yeah. But I think it's uncovering, why are we in such a hurry? What is really important? And again, this starts really small. It might start small with the staff. It might start small with church leadership. It might be things that you even say from, the platform. It might. So it's not. I don't think it's like a one way to do it. I think it's just a slow, incremental way. Do your volunteers jet? Maybe that's an opportunity to kind of, how do we slow the pace down? Just enough. I'm not saying you got to flip and, like, pull up a chair and hang out for 3 hours. I'm not advocating that. But what I am saying is be mindful of, pace and speed. I think about, this is maybe a lighthearted illustration. I think about a staff member who may encounter a guest, and instead of, like, pointing the guest to the restroom, they walk them to the restroom. Like, don't go in it with them, obviously, but they walk them to the restroom. And so, like, these are little ways to model what we're wanting to see. And so you may not notice people watching, but, like, people watch, people observe, people hear. And it's this cultural thing that's being built. So, and oftentimes, look, here's the reality. There's a disconnect. Here, for example, you ever go to a restaurant, and the person that welcomes you in, they have a smile, they're warm. You're like, wow, this person's amazing. It's not too much. And then they seat you, and the person comes to your table to take your order, and they're physically there, but they're not there. Yeah. And it's like, it's a transaction. It's, what do you want? It's not warm. It's not inviting. And so you get these 2 different experiences, and oftentimes that's what happens in the church. So there's a disconnect, and really the idea is, how do we link those moments? So someone who watches us or sees us on the screen, social media, website, or a video, or whatever it may be, YouTube, and then they, in the parking lot, oh, wow, it's very similar. And then that first door, very similar. And so we're beginning, and when you think about culture, it's how do we connect the dots that the moments aren't seen until they're like really felt, and then that person notices.
Yeah.
So I think for our church staff, it's, do we have, I don't want to say you can plan everything, but what are the things that we're wanting to model, and being reminded that whatever we model is contagious.
Yeah.
Let me give you one more example.
Sure.
Yeah. This is, I guarantee if you're a church staff member, you know this. Have you ever had church staff but especially a volunteer, and they're like, no, that's not my job.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's what Jonathan does, or that's what Jason does. And what's interesting is they may not like overtly say it. They might have. I've had volunteers do that.
Yeah.
But a lot of times behaviorally, that's what they do. That's a cultural aspect, and that can spread. Flip side, same coin. You have a volunteer that smiles and that is warm and inviting. That can equally be infectious, right? Contagious. Yeah. And so again, that cultural aspect, it spreads. And as church staff, we have to kind of assess, like, what is our culture like? How do we really do things here?
We'll get back to the conversation, but real quick, I want to tell you about our sponsor. Church hospitality, guest services, first impressions. These are phrases we as church leaders are very familiar with. But sometimes through the grind of daily tasks and prepping for church each week, we lose the heart of hospitality. Guest care becomes a checklist rather than a discipleship effort. First Impressions is an organization committed to helping churches create meaningful connections with guests, from the first visit to lifelong discipleship. Whether you're looking to sharpen your team's skills, build a proven follow-up plan, or take your guest experience to the next level, they've got you covered. Through their First Impressions online conference, First Impressions live conference, First Impressions Academy, and executive coaching, they equip churches with the strategies, systems, and support you need to invite, welcome, and connect with your church guests. Learn more at firstimpressions.church. And now back to the conversation.
Yeah, and so it's funny because you talked about the idea that people, volunteers tend to bolt. I think about this is we have this, we've put production at the forefront of church for so long. The production, not saying, light show, fog machine. I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about from service start time to service end time, maybe 10 minutes on the front end, 10 minutes on the back end. We focus so much on that. That's everything that happens in planning center, right? Like that's what we worry about with planning center. So what we do is we show up to service 2 hours early to get everything perfect for that little moment, right? So what happens is if we have 2 or 3 services, we've been at church for 6 hours already. We need to get home. And I wonder what would happen if we were able to take off some of that front end stuff, that front end time where we have to be at church, so that people didn't feel like, oh my gosh, I got to get out of here because I've been here so long, and left a little bit of margin at the end so we didn't have to rush out. I think about like a practical thing like a worship team. Are you rehearsing Sunday morning where you have to get there 2 hours, you're setting up the sound team, the worship team, the service director, everyone has to get there 3 hours before service to try to figure out the set. And then of course to just like, please let me pack up my instrument and go, right? Like I just want to get out of here. I've been here forever. I have a life outside of church. So could we do a rehearsal on a Thursday night and show up and just sound check one song or even like half of a song so that we don't have to be here this like marathon time? And then it feels better to hang out after service. Same thing with greeting team, right? Like, can you set things up on Saturday night as much as possible? Obviously there's outdoor things, but could you do some of the stuff during the week so that you give margin for people to actually hang around and not feel like they've been here forever? So I think that's a really practical way to do it. I think also just having things after service, right? Like my church is king at this. Like they're really good at like everything is a party. So every couple of weeks there's bounce houses, there's popcorn being served, there's paletas, there's something to make people want to hang out. And just, at least for 5 minutes, they at least stand in line for 5 minutes to get their thing, right? And that's 5 minutes where people are hanging out and looking for something to do. Now, if we create this culture of like, hey, and what we do when we're hanging around is we just talk to people we don't know. We meet people we don't know. If we can connect those two things, we give space for people to, again, not just rush out. And then we hopefully provide the culture, the And I do think that does start with pulpit, right? We do need to preach this, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think it's funny when I read the Old Testament, hospitality was like a big deal. Like, God was like, my people are going to be super hospitable. Like, like it shocks me. Like that and the Sabbath are two things that like I wouldn't think would be that big of a deal, but God's like, you better pay attention to this, right? Like he got mad at his people for not being hospitable and for not honoring the Sabbath, right? So it is important. So we can preach about that. That's something worth preaching about because it is important to the heart of God.
Yeah. If just picking up on what you said, like hospitality is a meta narrative, right? So it goes all throughout the story in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. And what's cool is just because you preach, it doesn't mean it's actually going to happen. But you can do a really cool sermon series. And there's Old Testament stories, there's New Testament stories. In fact, there's on the back half in the New Testament, what's interesting is there was a time in culture, sometimes it feels like it's the exact same way it is today, where it says practice hospitality. And what's interesting is in the culture at the time, hospitality was being squeezed out by other things in culture. And so the writer in the New Testament is like, practice hospitality. Don't let it get squeezed out because it is foundational to who we are. It's what brings people in. It's what communicates care. It's how people feel seen. And this isn't just a New Testament thing. Again, meta-narrative, Old Testament, New Testament, all the way through the story of the Bible. So it's a great opportunity to talk about hospitality in the church, hospitality in your home. And what's interesting is, sorry, this feels like a soapbox. Hospitality isn't just reserved.
We wrote a book, so there is a soapbox. This is our soapbox.
Yeah, that is kind of true. It gives us a little license to chat about it. Hospitality is not about something we do. It is about something it's who we are. And so hospitality is, yes, how you show up at church. Hospitality is, what it's like to experience inside your home. Hospitality is like, what's it like to experience you at the grocery store? What's it like to experience you at a theme park? And so hospitality is like, what is it like to be around you?
Yeah.
And then when you think about that on a larger scale, that's where we get the cultural pieces. This may or may not be appropriate, but sometimes I think people mean well, but it doesn't land well. So for example, if you were to take an intention and perception spectrum. On the intention side, like I have my thoughts and I have my emotions. Like I really mean this. Here's my intent, right? And then on the other side, on the perception, it's how I feel about the experience with you and the story I'm telling myself about you. And what's interesting about culture is not found in cute slogans. Culture is found in repeatable stories. And so if on the perception side, the story I'm telling myself was nobody spoke to me or, whatever it might be, on the intention and perception spectrum, the only moment that we share together is the behavioral aspect of how you, the staff, or you, the volunteer, showed up. Right? I don't know what your thoughts and intentions are. All I know is this one moment, and then I know how I feel when I walk away from you, and then I know the story I'm going to tell myself about you.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, you can mean well, but we also have to remember, like, how we show up is really, really, really important. And that sounds like, well, duh. But sometimes we forget we mean well, we just don't show up well. And so it's like, how do we show up well? Again, because the story I'm telling myself is not about your intention, because I don't know it. It's about what this moment is like with you. And when you think about culture, it's the stories that get retold that really express what it was like to be at your church or to engage with you, the volunteer. So
it's
again,
like the
joke
about marriage where it's like, where the wife's like, you never tell me you love me. And you're like, well, yeah, I told you one time. If it changes, I'll let you know, right? Like but it is like, I believe I love you, but if it's not demonstrated, if it's not shown, then it doesn't matter. So, I mean, to your point, stories is a great way to reinforce culture. So as a volunteer leader, yes, we tend to praise, like we talked about last week, tasks, right? Like you set things up. It looked beautiful. But what if instead we shifted our praise to be cultural related, to be welcome related. So like, hey, I saw that you hung out 20 minutes after service. Hey, everyone, Jim hung out 20 minutes after service and just talked to people he'd never met before. That was really cool. Great job, Jim. Right? Like we tell that story, we praise that, and people move toward our praise. Right? Like there's this thing like, moths to a flame. Right? Like if praise is the flame, we're all moths. We want to get close to that light. We want to get close to that warmth because I want to be praised. So. And we don't do this manipulatively, right? Like we're not trying to manipulate our volunteers, but there is a reality of the same thing. Whenever my son models the behavior that I'm trying to instill in him, I'd be like, hey, good job. You said bye to everyone. Hey, you talked to her. Great job. Like little praise. Obviously, for a 4-year-old, that works. For an adult, that's pretty patronizing. Like, good job. You talked to someone, right? Like, but we model, we change our praise to match the people we're talking to, right? But like, when we praise it, he's like, oh, my dad, that's what my dad values. That's what my dad thinks is important, right? So definitely using stories, telling stories about people doing that thing that was the culture we want to include in our church is a really practical way to do that. What are some other practical ways we can really like do this to shift our culture?
Yeah. Being reminded that culture will always outlast policy. So you can say, walk a guest to the where they want to go. Mm-hmm. But when someone does it, like that's the cultural policy. So when you lead volunteers, obviously when you're trying to scale something, you have to have some guidelines, right? You're training and there's some guidelines, but like you actually have to do it. So I think about, the example that you just gave, as lighthearted as this may sound, one of the things I have to credit my wife with this, that when you come into the home, whether you're a guest, a friend, family, doesn't matter. She's really big on like pausing what you're doing and like looking at the person and speaking to them, greeting them. Mm-hmm. And so as simple as it is, it's a priority for her because she realizes she's a therapist and she realizes the importance of, the messaging in the face. And so when I think about, volunteers and welcoming guests, staff welcoming guests, staff engaging with volunteers, it could be cultural, but like, we're busy, we're doing stuff. But remember, at the end of the day, we're relational beings. Mm-hmm. And so it's pausing long enough to like, Jonathan, I see you. Remember, people want to be seen, not noticed. We notice things, we see people. Mm-hmm. And so this could be a moment where I see you, Jonathan. I greet Jonathan. I slow my pace down long enough to engage with Jonathan. I think a cultural piece, as simple as this is, now I know some people say, I'm terrible at remembering names. But if you can remember names, that's a huge deal. And that's a cultural thing because it's like, I see you, I listened to you when you gave me, your name. And again, you can use it multiple times. So I think like that's an example. You talked about greeting, teaching, your son to do that. And it's like, oh, that's awesome. I think about when a volunteer remembers the name of a guest who maybe was there the week before, mm-hmm. or when they come out after the service. There's this thing that it feels, again, culture, it feels unique and different that you saw me, you remember me, and it begins this interesting relational engagement. So I think it's these small acts that accumulate that really become the culture. So whether it's pausing what you're doing, looking at someone, whether it's remembering someone's name, whether it's, the example that you gave earlier. Okay, here's one. I'm going to poke a little bit right here. If you lead volunteers, you know what I'm talking about. Being on time. Being on time is a big deal. And so I think because remember, being on time for other volunteers, so staff person or volunteer being on time for other volunteers communicates respect, honor. Being on time for the guests, you're in the spot where you're supposed to be, or in the area, or however you set it up. We're going to be on time because we want to be prepared for the guests. We want to honor and respect the guests. And so I think like that's
here's a poke even further though. Yeah. So we want our volunteers to show up on time, but are you showing up on time with what you should have prepared?
Yeah.
So often we have our
That's
guests
good.
show up on time, our volunteers show up on time, and then we're doing things that they're having to wait on us for.
That's fair.
And so that causes them to not want to show up on time, which
Yeah.
then causes our congregation to not show up. So, I mean, you talked about this with your wife, right? Like she's the top, like you and her are the top of your household, right? So if your kids are going to do this, they need to see their parents modeling it for them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I would say, hey, you know, if you're the person carrying the torch for the welcome team at your church or for the welcoming culture at your church, show them this video, right? Like show them this podcast and say, we all need to be modeling this because my volunteers are looking at you, pastor, or at you, tech team leader, or at you, whatever. And like, yeah, they see me being welcoming, but that's our job.
Yeah.
What is the culture of our church? And we all
Yeah.
need to be focusing on that. So let's all try to be intentional about being with people.
Okay, so since you went there, I know we're close to end. Remember this, staff person, whether you're senior pastor, executive pastor, you're single staff church, you're on the tech team, you're whatever. Hospitality is the responsibility of everyone. If you're singing on platform, if you're preaching, it doesn't matter. It is not role specific. It's not just a team that does it. We all embody what biblical hospitality is, and that's intentionally providing generous care to the person that's right in front of us, because that is the opportunity that God is giving to us. So in essence, we're honoring him by doing that, and we're honoring them by doing that too.
Yeah, that's good. So we're talking about the comeback effect. Next week, we'll talk about chapter 3. But if you haven't subscribed yet to this podcast, go ahead and do that. Leave a comment below if you're on YouTube or whatever platform you're watching on. Reach out to us, talk to us, say what you liked about this podcast, what you didn't. We, again, want to make this as useful as possible for you. So we will see you next week.